First story. We never open the door when there's only one knock. Please, just let me in, it's getting cold. The voice was familiar, only older than I remembered, very close to detail. Lala, please. Using my old nickname was a nice touch as well. I sat on the floor next to the door, my arms wrapped around my legs. Of course, this had to happen the 1 week my parents left me alone. They hadn't gone on vacation for years. I practically begged them to get away for a while. For their own good. If I called them, they'd come right back, but I don't think that would have helped me anyway. Besides, I wasn't an idiot. I heard the knock and I would not open that door. When someone comes to your house, they will ring the bell or knock a few times. Most people like to play safe and simply use the bell. And then you open the door as you normally would. But never, absolutely never, should you open the door when there's only one knock. It was the very first thing we were told when we moved to this neighborhood all those years ago. There are a bunch of rumors of people disappearing or suddenly dying after opening their doors, though they all supposedly happened before we even lived here. I never believed in it, not even when I was little. This town was simply insane. Most people here were a little eccentric and unusual. Well, that's what I believed until I heard my lost sister call for me, after the one loud knock on our front door. Please, go away, I whispered. Even after all those years, I recognized her voice, and when I heard it, I jumped right up, ready to open that door wide. But I knew it wasn't her. I'd looked through the window. There was nobody in front of our door. I don't know how much time had passed before I finally grabbed my phone and called Max, who's not only our neighbor, but one of my closest friends. She's here, I said. I knew I wasn't making much sense. I didn't know how to word my thoughts. Who? Where? He answered. Ruby. Silence. What? Max started speaking but stopped. She knocked. That was enough information for him. You didn't open, did you? I shook my head, which of course he couldn't see. I'm coming over now, okay? I'm not sure how many minutes passed, but Ruby had stopped asking me to open the door. Hey, Lainey, I don't think the bell is working, I heard Max. Maybe they screwed with it. I swallowed. You could knock. There was silence for a little while, followed by one loud thud. When I didn't open the door, the sound of Max started shouting loudly, "Open the ficking door!" His voice became louder and louder until it hit a frequency that almost made my eardrums explode. I didn't move. I didn't speak, and finally, the doorbell rang and the voice became silent. Slowly, I got up from the door to look outside. This time, it was really him. The last time I saw her, we had the biggest fight of our lives. We were sitting in the living room with tea that had already turned cold. I don't open up about Ruby often, but hearing her voice today really messed me up. And all because of stupid Jack, I rolled my eyes. Max smiled. A boy? I shook my head and laughed. Jack was a stuffed toy in the shape of a pumpkin. I'd never told Max about the fight. In fact, nobody but my parents knew about it. I loved that damn thing, won it at the Halloween carnival. When Ruby saw it, she begged me to give it to her. She cried for hours because she hadn't won it. And even when my parents said they'd buy her another toy, she wouldn't stop. She wanted mine. Well, she wanted to be just like you. It's sweet. I nodded. Ruby was a year younger than me, but she used to act as if we were twins. She wore my clothes, played the same sports, and always wanted to hang out with me and my friends. When I think about it now, I think it was adorable. Of course, back then, I found it insufferable. I sighed. For days, I took Jack everywhere with me, even to the bathroom. It was probably just out of pettiness, but that toy became everything to me. So when I came home from school one afternoon and saw that Ruby had cut it in half, I screamed at her like never before. She only looked at me with big, teary eyes. Max put his hand on my shoulder. Come on, Lainey. Siblings fight. It's normal. I saw you with her, though, and you were a damn good big sister. I nodded. Of course, I knew it was just some stupid fight between kids, but if I could turn back time, I'd give her every shitty toy I owned. This happened 5 years ago. Ruby would be 16 now. My parents have tried everything for years to find her. I believe the only reason we still live here is that they never entirely gave up the hope that she'd come back home one day. Maybe now she was, just in a different way. Do you think I'm losing my mind, Max? He raised an eyebrow. I think you lost that a whole while ago, he joked. No, I'm serious. I mean, it's not possible that I actually heard her earlier. He shrugged. I mean, you did hear a knock. I don't think it was actually her, though. Max and I used to make fun of the superstition. When we were younger, before Ruby disappeared, we once played ding-dong ditch. After a few houses, Max decided to knock once at the door of our neighbor Mrs. Telsky. Someone saw us though, and Max got the biggest lecture of his life from his grandpa, like it was a really big deal. My parents weren't happy either, but Max was grounded for 2 months, during which his grandpa told him all sorts of horror stories from this town. I don't think it was her either, but I do think it was mimicking her, or trying to, I said. For what it's worth, I think it was smart that you didn't open the door. Maybe we're all just a little crazy, but better safe than sorry, right? Max offered to stay the night, and I immediately said yes. We got the air mattress and watched movies until I started to hear him snoring. The good thing about Max was, I never felt awkward around him. He regularly stayed over since we were little, especially often after Ruby was gone. Having him here really helped against the silence. My mind became easier, and my body heavier. Real thoughts started to mix with dreams. I was beginning to fall asleep. And then there was another knock. It came from the front door downstairs, but I heard it loud and clearly. My heart started racing just like it did this afternoon. "Max, did you hear that?" I whispered, but he didn't answer. "Lala, it's dark. Please come and get me." Ruby's new voice cried from outside. "Max, please tell me you hear this." I looked over at him, but he didn't move. Finally, I collected the courage to get up and turn on the lights. "Ma." The eyes of my friend were wide open, but he didn't speak. He didn't move. I ran over to him and tried to shake him, but his whole body was stiff. Only his eyes moved. "Let me in," the voice from downstairs screamed. I didn't know what to do anymore. Max was clearly awake, but it seemed as if something was holding him back, almost like he was having sleep paralysis, but with his eyes open. "They're pulling me away. Lala, please help me." I don't know what happened then, but I immediately jumped up and ran downstairs. Some kind of instinct kicked in. Maybe it was her. Maybe I could pull her back inside. But if this was really Ruby, was she also the one doing this to Max? My hands touched the cold door handle, moving almost as if I was in a trance. "I have Jack. They fixed him, Lala. We don't need to fight anymore." Those words pierced through my body and woke something up inside of me. I stepped away from the door and walked back upstairs, passing my room where Max was still lying still. But I didn't stop. I walked to the next room, Ruby's old bedroom. Everything there looked just the way it did when she was still here. My parents could never change it. Everything was still the same, and Jack was still placed on her bed where I put it 5 years ago after I'd sewn it back together. Second story. My life has been ruined by a stupid charcuterie board of all things. My wife and I recently bought our first home. It's an old house, a fixer-upper that needed some elbow grease put into it. But it was within our budget, and we weren't afraid of a little hard work. First, we fixed up the kitchen and bedrooms, then the living room and dining room. One by one, we checked items off our list as we made our first home into a dream home. Eventually, all that was left was cleaning out the attic and the basement. Whoever had owned the house before had left a ton of stuff behind. The attic was full of musty boxes of clothes and old furniture. The basement was unfinished, but had a strange number of half-melted candles and a box of old moth-eaten satin robes, which was pretty weird, but my wife and I had a good time playing dress-up and repurposing some of the old furniture. One day, while we were cleaning out the basement, Chrissy, my wife, found a really cool wooden board. It was about 18 by 20 inches, and decorated with all sorts of intricate designs and carvings of angels around the edges. The center of the board listed all of the numbers of the alphabet in order, along with the numbers 0 through 10. In the top corners it said the words yes and no. I thought it was probably some 1800s era teaching tool, but Chrissy corrected me. "Oh my God," Chrissy exclaimed as she brushed a century worth of dust from its surface. "What a cute charcuterie board." I walked over to her and picked it from her hands as she held it out. "Whoa, babe, this is pretty cool." "Babe, look at this." She held up another piece of wood. It was vaguely in the shape of a triangle, finely decorated with a hole in its center about 1 inch in diameter. "It's for scooping out dips. This is just too cute." A few weeks went by and Chrissy and I started to think maybe we weren't as handy as we liked to think. The doors we mounted would open by themselves. Pictures we hung on the walls would fall to the ground. Once we entered the kitchen to find every cabinet and drawer open. It was disheartening to think maybe we had bitten off more than we could chew with this project. One night, while watching a movie and enjoying charcuterie together, I used the scooper to put a fat hunk of goat's cheese on my plate and sat back on the couch. When I noticed the scooper started sliding along the board untouched, it stopped after a few inches. But man, how annoying it is to think the house we just poured our savings into might not even be level. I didn't bring it up to Chrissy because I didn't want to upset her. Funny story about that night. Halfway through the movie, Chrissy cut a piece off of the block of Gouda we had on the charcuterie board. She ate the cheese and tossed the knife back onto the board. Instead of clattering on the board, then coming to rest, the knife started to spin. I think it might have been greased with the olive oil on the board, but it spun for nearly a solid minute before coming to a screeching halt. The blade pointed directly at where the board said, "No." We both laughed about that for a while. I mean, what are the chances of doing that again? It was so weird. Our cat started acting strangely. It would stare off into random corners with his hackles raised. He became more aggressive towards Chrissy and I. And he would absolutely lose his sheet when we brought out that cool charcuterie board we found. In fact, he hated that charcuterie board so much that we ended up throwing it in our garbage can. That night, our air conditioner broke. I don't mean it stopped working. I mean we couldn't shut it off. The temperature in our house dropped by like 50 degrees. We could see our breath in our bedroom. I told Chrissy I would call the HVAC man in the morning, and we went to sleep under a mountain of blankets. When I woke up the next morning, Chrissy was gone. I assumed she went out early to run some errands, but her car was still in the driveway. Maybe she was out for a run. I heard the cat make some really aggressive noises and went to go see what was going on with him. He was on the kitchen counter hissing at a plank of wood that sat on the kitchen counter. It had some sort of symbol carved deep into the wood. I picked it up and turned it over and was shocked to see it was the charcuterie board we had thrown out. I figured Chrissy had changed her mind and fished it out of the trash before going on her run. I went into the bathroom to wash my face and get ready for the day. As I lowered my face to the sink to splash some water on my face, the bathroom door slammed shut. Thinking Chrissy had just come home, I tried to go out and ask her where she'd been. But I couldn't get out of the bathroom. The door was locked shut somehow. I couldn't get out. Just another thing to add to my to-do list. I had to climb out of the window and walk around to the front door to get back in the house. Chrissy wasn't home. A few hours passed and I still hadn't seen Chrissy. I began to get worried. I tried her cell phone several times with no answer. As I paced the house trying to put together the pieces about where my wife could be, the basement door creaked open. I went to shut it and heard noises coming from the dark, unfinished basement. Footsteps, then whispers, then oddly, the muffled sounds of a baby crying. I called the police and told them my house had been broken into. They performed a full search of the house, including the basement and the attic. They didn't find anyone. I filed a missing persons report for Chrissy before they left. It's been 3 days. I still hear footsteps and voices. Doors are constantly opening and closing. I've thrown that ficking charcuterie board away 3 times, and it still keeps coming back, and I've checked the AC unit 100 times. I even called a professional in, but it still gets so cold in this house every night. I know I'm a good carpenter. Those doors aren't crooked. The floors of this house are level. I'm beginning to understand what is really going on here. My house is haunted, and I don't know what to do about it. I can hear Chrissy. Her voice is coming up from the basement. She's asking me for help. I want to go down there, but I'm too ficking scared. My hands are shaking as I type this. I can't trust this house. I know that as soon as I walk down there, the door will close behind me. What do you guys think I should do? Third story. If you see a lone roadside food stand in the dead of night, no matter how hungry you are, don't stop. When I just turned 20, I received a wonderful surprise in the mail. A happy birthday message from my good friend May, as well as an invitation to her wedding in the coming week. May's father had gotten a new job out of town while we were both still in primary school, and she left together with the rest of her family to her dad's new workplace back then. Moving out of town practically meant disappearing forever in those days, so to a teenage me who had been granted newfound freedom by my parents, receiving word from a long-lost friend after almost a decade was akin to a miracle from the heavens. It was thus a no-brainer to accept her invitation. After sending my response in the mail, I immediately started making my preparations for the trip. However, I didn't know where May had moved to. so it came as a complete shock to learn that she was now living way across the peninsula, on an island off the west coast called Penang, to be exact. For someone who had barely traveled out of state at the time, going to such a faraway place felt like I was going to a whole new country altogether. I was practically reeling in unbridled excitement the whole time that I was packing up my bags and counting the small stacks of notes stashed beneath my mattress. Coincidentally, my brother was heading to the capital on the same day I was planning to leave. He offered to give me a ride to Putrajaya, the city's main bus terminal, where I could catch a long-distance bus up north and hop onto a ferry across to the island. He was so generous with his offer that I wondered aloud if he had taken the wrong medicine in the morning. Then he showed me the low fuel light on the dashboard, and I could only sigh as I coughed up the petrol money. We reached the outskirts of the capital, just as the sun was about to set. My brother promptly dumped me and my luggage outside Putrajaya bus terminal before screeching away in his beat-up Toyota. There was no way to buy a ticket in advance, so I was praying like mad that a kind soul would sell me a last-minute ticket to my destination. To my dismay, however, I soon found out that past evening time, the ticket counters in Putrajaya had already closed up shop, and only the ulat, slang for ticket touts, translated literally to meanworm, were selling what I needed. It was clear as a red flag that these guys were no kind souls, but being tired and desperate. I begrudgingly paid triple the market price for my ticket on a Penang-bound bus, which was due to arrive at 8:15 p.m. at platform 10. Thankfully, it seemed that a little bit of luck was on my side, because a bus really did pull over at the platform 15 minutes past 8. Said bus had no decals or identification whatsoever, though, which left me wondering what dubious, unscrupulous company operated this shitbox. 10, maybe 15 other passengers boarded the bus with me, most of them blue-collar workers returning home after a long day. A stout middle-aged uncle climbed into the driver's seat, flung his cigarette butt out the window, and took a glance at everyone seated on the bus. "Anyone going beyond Ipoh?" he asked in a gruff voice. "State your destinations." Bemused, I raised my hand. A lady sitting across from me and another 2 passengers at the back also raised theirs. The 2 rear passengers were going to Taiping, the next major city after Ipoh, while the lady's destination was Butterworth, where I was headed for as well. The driver shamelessly charged the 4 of us an extra $5 for some bullshit long-distance fee. After a heated exchange, the 2 Taiping passengers grabbed their bags and furiously stormed off the bus. I was honestly too exhausted to change buses on a dime, so I paid the nonsense extra charge, and so did the lady. We left Putrajaya uneventfully after that. At some time past 10, we stopped a street away from the bus terminal in Ipoh because the bus we were on was unlicensed and probably street illegal. Everyone else except for the lady and I alighted. As a result, the bus became a lot quieter, which gave me the chance to catch some sleep. I wasn't sure how much time had passed when I woke up from my nap, but I could feel a throbbing pain in my head from resting against the stiff headrest for too long and my stomach rumbling. Looking out of the windows only revealed the outline of dark treetops against a pale, moonless sky. The lady beside me seemed to be asleep, so I asked the driver if we were approaching Taiping soon. "Left already," he grunted in response. "We should be crossing the border into Penang soon." I thanked him before returning to my seat. After some time had passed, however, it didn't look as though our surroundings had changed much from before. I was starting to feel really hungry and regretting not buying any snacks before boarding the bus. So I decided to ask the driver again. "We'll reach the border at any moment," he muttered under his breath, as if trying to ignore my question. Feeling a little weirded out, I went back to my seat and tried to quell my ravenous hunger with the remaining water in my bottle. Yet not a minute later, my stomach was growling loudly and angrily again, and this time I had no more water left to quench my thirst too. There was still no sign of civilization either, so I anxiously wanted to ask the driver if we were on the correct road at all. But for some odd reason, my body felt super heavy all of a sudden. It was as if an unseen force was forcing my body into the seat, and I couldn't even lift myself onto my feet no matter how hard I tried. Just as panic began to rise in my gut, a conspicuous yellow glow in the distance ahead caught my attention suddenly. The brightly lit silhouette of a roadside stand soon revealed itself ahead of us. Colorful banners and lights adorned its wooden walls, and under a large canopy between 2 large trees was 2 rows of tables packed with customers. A large sign advertising delicious satay and drinks hung from the corrugated iron roof of the stand. And sure enough, the mouth-watering aroma of grilled meat wafted through the open windows as the bus approached the stand. It was no doubt a jarring sight to behold in the dead of night, especially when we had been traveling on a pitch-black road for so long. But I was more than relieved to find a welcome respite from my empty stomach. The driver seemingly had the same thought as I did, because he switched the hazard lights on and steered towards the road shoulder. All of a sudden, the lady beside me started shouting at the driver. "What are you doing? Don't stop the bus." "We're taking a short break," the driver retorted as he pulled the handbrake. "Please, you have to listen to me. This is not a good place to stop at," she pleaded, her eyes frantically darting between the roadside stand and the driver's annoyed face. "That's not what you think it is. We must leave immediately." Her protests fell on deaf ears, however. With a roll of his eyes, the driver jumped off and made a dash towards the stand, where the vendor was gesturing at him with a friendly wave. By then, I was so famished too that I was practically ready to pry the window off its frame just to get to the savory food faster. But two desperate arms abruptly held me back from rushing down the aisle to the open doors. "Don't!" the lady screamed at me. "You'll die if you go there!" Her maniac screaming momentarily snapped me out of the horrible daze of hunger and insanity that had overwhelmed my mind. Staggering backwards into my seat, I blinked and gawked at her crying face. "What's wrong, Kakak?" "Take a closer look." She pointed a shaky finger at the roadside stand. "There's so many people, but do you see any cars parked by the roadside?" Her question sent a literal chill down my spine. I turned my gaze to the windows, and just as the lady pointed out, there were no other vehicles around except for the bus we were on. It was then that the illusion was broken before my very eyes. The customers sitting at the tables were nothing more than solidified shadows and ghostly wisps. Their conversations were in a strange, deeply unnatural language I'd never heard of. The words rolling off their tongues made with sounds no human could possibly make or comprehend. But worst of all, I realized that the vendor, who now appeared to be a creepy amalgamation of human and indescribable demonic features, had their eyes fixated on me. In the split second that we made some semblance of eye contact, I swore I saw a crooked grin spread across its hellish face. Letting out an alarmed cry, I ducked beneath the window and trembled violently. "What the hell is that?" "Most probably Jinn," the lady whispered next to my ear. "It's angry because I broke its spell, and now it's trying to exert its influence over your mind again. Cover your ears and don't look at it directly." I was already scared shitless at this point, so I followed what she said without a single complaint. "Kak, how do you know?" "I've traveled between Taiping and Butterworth many times during the day, and I don't remember seeing any roadside satay stands along this stretch of road," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "In fact, the land that this road sits on is known to be dirty, so no one will ever dare to set up shop here." Just at that moment, a loud grunt came from the front of the bus. We both started in fright, and the lady nervously raised her head to catch a glimpse of the unwelcome guest. "You're back," her voice trailed off as she stared at the driver with wide, terrified eyes. Noticing that her face had gotten deathly pale, I mustered the courage to ask her what was the matter. "You can't see," she muttered, her gaze still riveted to the driver who had returned to the wheel and resumed driving. I glanced at the driver, but try as I might, I couldn't sense that anything about him had changed. "That thing. It feeds on strong emotions," the lady continued, her words not quite making sense to me. "And the driver is full of negative emotions." Streetlights suddenly flickered into view ahead of us. We were finally entering the border town into Penang. I let out a sigh of relief and slumped into my seat. But to my shock and utter bewilderment, the lady grabbed her belongings and ran to the doors in a mad rush. "Let me off," she cried, frantically banging her fists on the door shutters. "Stop the bus. I want to get off." Even the driver blinked in surprise. "We haven't arrived at Butterworth yet." The lady looked at him as if she was staring at a ghost. "I don't care. Please, stop the bus." The driver shot her a disgusted look. Nevertheless, he pressed the brake and pulled over by the town's main road. Before the doors opened, the lady caught my frightened stare and shook her head wildly. "If you value your life, don't stay on this bus any longer than you have to." Her ominous warning quite literally made me sick to my stomach. I was seriously contemplating if I should also bail out, but it was still some time before dawn. Taxis would be a nightmare to get a hold of at such a time. Not wanting to be stranded in the middle of nowhere, I could only watch as the lady vanished in the distance behind and braced myself for the worst. But perhaps luck was really on my side after all, because the bus reached Butterworth bus terminal at the break of dawn somewhat in one piece. Shaken and on the verge of a mental breakdown, I cried when my feet finally touched solid ground, and I spotted the ferry to Penang Island waiting by the sun-kissed dock, thanks to May and her family. My short stay in Penang was nothing short of fun and memorable. After the wedding, I returned home via train. I really wasn't in the mood for another long-distance bus ride. I honestly have no idea what happened to that particular bus driver, but a few months later, news about an accident that happened on the then newly opened Penang Bridge reached my town. The details are a little fuzzy, but I vaguely remember it was about a long-distance bus suddenly losing control on the bridge during a thunderstorm and crashing straight into the waters below. Luckily, a fishing boat was nearby, and all the passengers on board were saved, except for the driver.